on live captions in case anyone could benefit from those.
Okay.
So it's all yours, Helga.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. Dr. Power and I know each other for a few years, and we have worked together very closely. So it's actually quite interesting that he is doing the same work as I am, and that he invited me to speak to his class, to you. It's really an honor for me to be part of your group today. And I will be telling you a bit more about the work that we've been doing in the last few years. But I also thought, because you are potential instructional designers, I'm going to go a bit deeper into the instructional design part as well before I move towards the projects that we have done, just to make sure that we are all on the same page here. Okay, so what I've prepared for today is really looking at, more than the project. I want us to go back to who are we designing for? And you will see how it connects with the seamless learning concept that we have written the book about. So we want to talk about the student-centered learning. Then I will just, touch on a few instructional design models. Then we will look at the seamless learning, and then at the end we will be looking at universal design learning, and then compare it with the seamless learning. And that is actually what I would like you to do with me. So we will be having a discussion about that. Okay, so first of all, and I love talking about this, why do we want to, what is our goal as educators and as instructional designers? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, which is their fourth goal, and the focus is quality in education. So if we ask ourselves, how can we reach that? I mean, there is such a vast environment that we are touching on if we talk about quality. We want to dig deeper and look at dig deeper and look at every one of these aspects, then it can get really complicated. So let's just take one step back and look at where, who are we actually teaching? And we are talking about the student, right? There are so many different challenges, as I said now, that we have at the moment in education. Education has changed so much after COVID, even before COVID, when mobile technology came in. Take it a step further back, when computers started coming in. And these technologies were included into teaching, and things had to change very quickly, but it didn't really change that much. So now we want to look at how can and where can we start to make it simple but doable? Because if you look at all these challenges that I have here on the slide, it can be rather daunting, because you don't know how you will be involving all of these aspects without having a roadmap. How will we bring experiential learning into our classroom? There's so many teachers and professors that ask me that. Okay, practical applications. That's kind of complicated sometimes with university courses. How can we bring in fun? Because these are the things we want to bring into the classroom, to involve the students more. How can we manage mental health of students? Each one of these pictures brings in some of the elements that we need to include to focus on and actually achieve quality education. Now, as I said, to achieve quality education, we take one step back and we look at the student. Now, from an instructional designer perspective, you must please apologize, I have a heavy cold. So the students, I hope you can all hear me. Can you all understand me? Okay, I don't see a no, so I guess it's right. Are you still with me here? Can you see my slides? Dr. Power? Anyone in the
All
class?
good.
Okay.
All good.
All good.
All good.
Right.
Oh, I forgot you probably can't see our screens right now while you're sharing yours. Can't see our camera images.
Yeah, I just see one little black block here on the corner. Okay, so at least I know you know what you know that you can see my slides. So looking at the student, we ask, first of all, we have to ask, who is the student? I'm talking about from an instructional design position. We want to design learning for the student that can incorporate many of these aspects that I spoke about a bit earlier. We also need to ask ourselves, where will the student learn? What is the student's background? What does the student want to achieve? These are questions that are really important. I don't know if you've heard this, the 5 W's and the 1 H. So these are the questions we ask. When will the student learn? And how does the student learn? Now, these are questions we keep in the back of our mind when we design. Now, first of all, we have heard, or we know from experience, and we have read a lot, that students learn with their senses, right? You know that yourself, you are in the process of learning. And all the senses, well, the senses that are included is sight, hearing, taste, touch, smell. We don't necessarily do smelling in an online class, but and touching maybe not that much. But in general, if a student sits in a face-to-face class, these the senses are involved. And if we look at the brain, it's really quite fascinating to see that mostly the visual, if you have two senses that work together, they, like for instance, your visual channel and your auditory channel, when those two work together, they move into the long-term memory. So it is helpful if one can include more than one sense for the long-term memory. And so just have a look at the brain for a change. Many people don't, or many educators don't even think about the brain of a student, but we know that that's where all our knowledge is stored. And so just to have a quick look at this, in the prefrontal cortex, that is where the short-term memory lies. And that is also where the verbal and the spatial recognition is found. And then this number 2, the amygdala here, you see that smaller shape there, and that's where the emotions and the memories lie. So if one brings in interesting, enjoyable, fun, love, okay, sometimes even grief and shame, this is where they are recognized on this part. They are not yet in a deeper memory, but they are observed from here. And then you've got the hippocampus, which is where your episodic memories is. So this is where your temporary storage is. So from there, it would move into the temporary storage. And then the cerebellum is where the fine motor control is. That's where your memory of using fine, like chopsticks, fine motor is stored. And also the ability to do that, that comes from there. And then we have the basal ganglia, which processes emotions, habits, rewards, movements, and learning. So this is really where all these different observations are processed. And then from there, if we can have, if we have all of these parts involved in the learning process of the student, from that as many as possible of the senses are included, the best memory can, well, a very deep memory can form, and that is then stored in the neocortex. And our aim is really to get as much of the learning into the neocortex, which we will then be able to recall later on. So this is just for interest. Now we have to take it a step further, and this is now we understand how the brain functions and that we need to include all the senses, and we need to bring some excitement and interesting experiences in, not only the understanding. And then how would we connect that? How would we connect the human brain with the technologies that are available now? These are topics that are very real at this moment. I mean, you know how much research and how much has been written about even looking at the brain, being able to follow where the movements are, and even research in the field of maybe building in a chip into the brain to improve some function of the body. Okay, but we're not going that far. We're just looking at the technology that's available to us. So where did this all begin? When were educators actually interested in designing for? Do we have a question? Oh, there's somebody in the lobby. Where it all began was after the Second World War, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but Robert Gagne, you know Robert Gagne with his 9 steps of education, of learning. He also designed this approach of combining technology, learning about technology with a human being. So he came up with the concept of machine on the one side, man on the one side, on the other side, and then these were the first steps of designing. So he would say, okay, we're going to design a learning intervention where the student can understand the machine. Then there will be a development stage. So you'll be developing the intervention, the learning intervention, or maybe the lesson then, if you want to understand it in that way. And then there will be a testing stage. Now, you have been part of the instructional design course for a while, so I'm sure some of you may recognize these stages, right? So this takes us to the next basic model, and this is really what evolved out of the work that Robert Gagne did. So the ADDIE model is based on his first research, and you know, when we want to design for those students specifically, we want to design that they will have a full experience. We want to get their attention. So first of all, we analyze what do they need to learn. Then we want to design for that specific goal. Then we want to develop all the different stages that they will go through. And then finally, it will be implemented. And then we evaluate. And this is a cyclical model, as you may know. So it can be repeated once you find there are flaws or there are things that you can improve. So that's the ADDIE framework, which is the base of most of the instructional design work. There are so many more, and I'm sure you have learned many more, but I just wanted you to be on the same page, as I said. Okay, and then we also need to look at the brain. How does it function? So it has different levels. There are different levels of learning, and you should all know Bloom's taxonomy. So if you think about the brain that I showed you just now, that the remembering part, that would be the lowest level, but it is already, you know, it's in the process of the understanding and the remembering. These two work very closely together. But then one wants to know, so how long will this memory stay? Are we going to keep it in the short-term memory? Or do we want, and is this what we want the students to do, to cram all the work before exam, and then when they're out of their exam, done their papers, they forget about it? And we know that as an instructional designer, we want to optimize the learning so that they actually are able to create their own learning once they've gone through the course. So these are the two basic ones that I want to talk to you about today. And now this takes us to the next section. And, you know, when I mentioned, when I showed you that picture of all the different challenges and all the things that we want to achieve with learning, it's really quite fascinating to see that this all can be brought together into one experience. There are so many aspects one needs to consider when you really want to do deep design. But to make things easier, and especially for the instructional designers in higher education, because we're not only working with one, say one subject, we're working with so many different ones. We need to get a seamless learning experience, and that's the aim of the ultimate aim that we want to achieve with the study that we have been doing. So basically, we looked at where seamless learning came from. We did workshops in 5 different countries. That was our first book. We repeated exactly the same workshop. We were 5 researchers in 5 countries, and each one did the same workshop in their country at their university, and they asked the professors at that university, how do they understand seamless learning and what is it about? So at first we explained to them what it is, so they know what it is, and then we asked them, so do you think it will be viable? Do you think it can work? And we divided the groups into 3. The Dreamer, it was actually quite a very nice project. They call it the Disney method. So each one was playing a different role. The Dreamer, the well, he's the idealist, then it's the realist, and then it's the critique, the one that criticizes. So we got all that information together, and then we analyzed it, and from there we came up with a process that one can use so seamless learning can be implemented at the university. And then we did another round because there was so much data, and then we found specific themes that came out that crystallized from all the data, and from there we came up with a model which we call this SLED model, which Seamless Learning Experience Design Model. And for you as instructional designers, you will be able to understand it better than other groups. But before I take it further to that specific design model, I want you to just think about what seamless learning is. So seamless learning is when a person experiences a continuity of learning. It's not only one event, and consciously bridges the multifaceted learning efforts across a combination of locations. So it can be in class, out of class. It can be when you're in the bus, or it can be wherever you are, library or even at home. Anytime, in the morning, evening. It's not a specific time. It can be synchronous, and some parts of the learning can be asynchronous. And then also across technology, so any technology that is available, or social setting. So seamless learning is really where learning can take place seamlessly from one location, from one learning environment to another, and can bring in sections like what I'm doing here now, where you bring a guest speaker into the classroom to look at something from a different perspective, maybe. Or you can build in an experience for the students to go out and to have a look at what other universities are doing, or in a, say, corporate environment, how the instructional designers are working there. I'm just giving this specific example for our group. And you bring the learning out of the class into the, wherever you are, and then from there you bring it back into the class. And it can be a classroom that's either, 4 walls, or you can meet up like we do it here. So it's really bringing all of these things together and having a seamless learning environment and a seamless learning experience for the student. So, okay, so these are the 2 books. Well, this is the first one. This one was the first one. And then we did an article on the SLED model. And then the last book, that's now the one that is published last month. We took it one step further with that book. It's just interesting for you to see how research can evolve. And we work together with all these international researchers. So we expanded our group. We invited more researchers, and we expanded it from 5 to 12, 13 actually, 13 researchers, and we worked in 9 countries. So this time it was the instructional designers that analyzed their courses according to questions that we had put together. And then we would ask, so how ready was your course before COVID for seamless learning, and how ready was it during COVID? Because many people moved online. Well, most people moved online. And did anything change in that time from a seamless learning experience perspective? Yeah, and so it's really fascinating. I hope you have time to read the book. And this takes us to the seamless learning framework, which we then brought together. And here you can see we call it the SLED model, and it consists of 5 concepts: the core concepts, positive, practical, human, and design concepts. I know this is quite a lot, but I will explain one by one. So the core concepts is really, it includes the pedagogical approaches. So say, for instance, you can imagine yourself having a shopping list, and you would go into the supermarket and you say, okay, I need to take, this is the line where I can get the groceries. Here's the line where I can pick up something else. Each one has its own, but now you have a specific recipe, and you need to get all these different ingredients. So we have a recipe, well, let's call it, the recipe is seamless learning experience. And now we want to decide which of these core concepts are we going to bring into our learning. And the first one would be deciding which learning pedagogies are we going to use. And I'm saying pedagogies because it can be more than one. For instance, a section of the learning can be constructivist. I would maybe start at the bottom of the slide saying behaviorist first. If you look at Bloom's taxonomy, where you understand and you repeat. So often a lesson starts there where you learn the new terminology. Then bring in maybe collaborative learning. I didn't even add all of them. These are just a few examples. And then you can do constructivist learning. So you decide which ones of those would you be using for the learning intervention. So this is the core concept. Then the positive concept. I mean, everything is described in much more detail in our book. So if you want to go and have a look at that, you can. This is really a very quick overview. And then the positive concepts are really the concepts that have to do with the mindset of the student, as well as of the lecturers and the institution. So, I mean, if there's a positive approach towards learning, a positive attitude, they can grow, the student will grow. But once he's negative, obviously he will not. And there are so many different influences that give him a positive or a negative mindset. And this is where one needs to look at what can we do to improve it. And then let's look at the next one, and that's a practical one. So the practical also includes the technology aspect. So technology for educational purposes do not need to be the state of the art. Technology is one thing that we need to think about in terms of a tool. David Jensen talks about the mind tool. Jonathan talks about technology as a mind tool. So we must use it as a tool, not, that the learning is improved by the tool, not necessarily because of the tool. And we can use small, you can use, that's why I'm thinking that the mobile phones are so helpful. Me coming from South Africa, it's really a challenge there, because I would say 80% of the students have SMS phones, but it's actually getting a bit better, but not everybody has smartphones. So one needs to think about, if you want to improve the learning of a student by using technology, you need to break your content into smaller micro learning. You know, that project that Dr. Powell was talking about. We have micro learning, like breaking up the learning into tiny bits and then sending them into the students via links, and they can open it up and listen to them. But so one needs to see which technology is most effective for which environment, because there are different needs. And then so seamless learning does not necessarily rely on technology, but it's a part of it. And then obviously access to other things like data and you know, practical aspects. Right, and then the human concepts. These are the stakeholders that are involved in the higher education environment. And here we're focusing on the student, but we're also focusing on the instructor and the university. And it's really important that students are accommodated, that they are supported, that there's a support system for them at the university that goes beyond our learning design, where you include, for instance, a writing center or the library or the, you know, all the support systems at the university. So the learning, the student and the student is supported, and his learning can be improved because of the support. Okay, and then the last one is the design concepts. Now, I started with Addy and Bloom, so we keep that as the main approach, but we also always keep in mind that it's student-centered. So the design concepts include all of these, and we want to bring in as seamless as possible learning experience for the student, and you see the students there in the center. Okay, so I think this is quite clear now, this SLED model. And if we want to design for a quality students experience, you must know the environment and build relationships. So this is just repeating it again. Student and human-centered, must be inclusive. So all the different approaches, and also all the different characteristics of a student. We try to include those to create a positive and meaningful user experience. Remember that learning is a journey and not only one event, so it's going to be a whole experience. And then research-based findings to make design decisions. Always good to go into research. Seek input from users and participants. Always look at the feedback from students, and use real metrics to measure performance improvement. So obviously we can look at data in that sense, and also maybe feedback again from maybe experience environments where they go. And then, you know, I also think it's really important to work hand in hand with the business world or the world outside to know really what is important. And, you know, it's part of the curriculum design, but it's also part of the of bringing in skills that the students need to learn, and then recognize the value of sharing and social engagement, and then be innovative and flexible. This is just the base for designing a quality student experience in general. Okay, now this takes us to the universal design and the principles of universal design, and I'm going to go through them very quickly. I'm not going to go into depth because we don't have that much time. And you must know, although I brought in a lot of pictures, it's more for you to see how the universal design is very applicable in a more for a product design, but it's also very applicable for learning. Okay, now in this case for product design, you see principle one is equitable use. Now, when we looked at the seamless learning, we also spoke about inclusion. So we really need to think about designing to include every student with whichever challenges or barriers they may have. We see a wheelchair here, but in our learning, we often speak about including like audio and additional like reading material, or, voice that could read what we need. So if a student is, maybe has eyesight problems, he would be able to read it and hear it as well. Okay, and then the second one here is flexibility in use. So again, here we see product, but we want to design in such a way that the student can get to the content from different ways, and he will be able to learn wherever he is. Here you have your student sitting at the computer, and he could also sit in the classroom. We have, during COVID, or just as COVID started tapering down, we used a method here at Concordia University in Chicago. We called it the high flex model. So I don't know if you did that too, Dr. Powell, but we had students that wanted to come to class, could be in class, but we simultaneously had online class going. So the students that couldn't come to class or didn't want to come to class because they thought they could maybe be sick, get sick. So we had our screen on the one side and students there like you are now, and we had our class, actual students in the class. So it was quite a challenge for the professor to look at the students and to look at that class, but it's possible, and to bring that into the design of the course. And then the third one, it needs to be simple and intuitive. So I really like these examples, very sweet, with IKEA and in these different, touch screens. So the use of the design is easy to understand. So we need to know that when we design, it's be easy to understand regardless of the user's experience. We need to know that we will have students that do not know technology and obviously all the new knowledge. It's new. We need to make sure that they understand it well and make it simple. We must know what the new language skill is and also what their concentration levels are. So these are all elements that can be included in our designs. Oh, I see this picture moved up. But okay, this is really just an example of bringing in like a infographic and then words next to it so that you can learn Chinese. And the design communicates necessary information, so this perceptible information, effectively to the user, regardless of ambient conditions or the user sensory ability. So we need to bring in as much as possible so the student can understand it better. And then the tolerance for error. This is, every design has errors, and one needs to understand that. One can go back and redesign it and listen, keep your ears and eyes open and make changes as they come. And then low physical effort. I guess this is more again for the product, but it's also user experience to make it as easy as possible for the students to access the technology, to access the information, and giving them different options. If they do not have computer access, like some of my students in South Africa, that there are good laboratories on campus and they can come and sit there and work there. Right, and then principles, the second one is the size and space for approach and use. So, okay, this is really very physical, size and space, but maybe one can also look at it from a designer perspective. How much bandwidth do you want to use? Things like that. Okay, so those are the basics. Now, I have given you a lot of information, and now I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask questions and to make comments. So, how much time do we have left?
Oh, we have about 20 minutes left, so we have plenty of time for questions.
Awesome.
And I was looking at the points you were making about the SLED design framework and about UDL principles and all of that. And it just reminded me that this batch of papers I just got in from this group of students, they all had to compile their own UDL guidelines based on some of the readings that they were doing and analyze some courses from those guidelines, from the perspective of those guidelines they came up with. So it was very similar to what we've done in the Global Research Project and to what we've done with the past couple of books. So it should be very familiar to all of you now what Dr. Hambrock has been talking about in the process that we've gone through with the SLED design. So share your thoughts, share your questions with us now. Do you see overlaps with what you've been looking at with UDL? Do you see overlaps with some of the guidelines that you've come up with for your papers? And can you see some utility to this design, the SLED design that Dr. Hambrock has presented on, in revising maybe some of the principles that you've come up with, or in taking another look at some of the courses you've been analyzing? Because I know most of you picked some courses that either you've done as a student or that are near and dear to your heart because you're working with them in your own context. Yes, sir, go ahead.
I guess I'll start us off. I see, yeah, the overlapping theme of accessibility comes up quite often. I'm not surprised. I was just wondering, I'm curious, Dr. Hambrock, if you can just maybe provide us with, in your vast expertise, is there a specific program or instance of this guideline model where you see it's best served that we could maybe, I don't know, we could use as a guide, or if you had to like pick one institution or a program that would say exemplify the SLED model? I was wondering if you could provide one.
Well, I think it's the challenge, or let's say, I'd rather see it as an opportunity than a challenge. You know, you can switch a weakness into a strength. Because this is really a very like an overview, or a very you know, your perspective goes above all the courses. It's really like looking at the design from a designer perspective, not for one specific course, but for the actual goal that you want to reach. As I said when I started off, we want to reach the learning of the student and improve that, right? As much as possible. So if I want to apply this, it's really like a philosophy that's overarching, but it can be boiled down to a very practical experience. And if I can give you an example, when we did an analysis of the courses with this model, we had 56 questions. You know, they tell you in research you shouldn't do so many questions because you can get survey fatigue. But there was so much to ask, and there's so much detail. If I give you this overarching these five themes, it just pulls it together so beautifully, because it's so much easier to have a bird's view from what's going on down there. And you can basically take any course and use this as a checklist, as criteria to see how many of these aspects are we including. And this is why I also brought in the university leadership. You cannot only bring in, if you want to do real seamless learning at the university, it can start with one professor in one subject, yes, but it's much more functional, and it will have a much better impact on the whole institution if the whole university looks at the courses again and says, well, let's follow a seamless learning approach. And what can we improve and what can we, and then we take the checklist and see what is there and what's not. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, thank you. Yeah,
Like...
I was focusing more on specific course where you're talking about more globally. So no, that definitely helps. Thank you.
Okay. I mean, what I can give you is, you know, I have this, like, I call it the shopping list. I can give it to you. It's very simple. And I think if you see that, it will make so much more sense, how this is, how you can pull this all together. Obviously, Dr. Power also has access to that because we will be using a list of criteria that evolved out of the shopping list, that for the next round. And yeah, we can share that. Obviously, I would like you to work with it, and maybe you can also do something as a project in your class with that criteria, and look at one course that you have at your university and say, this is what I see in my course, this I don't see, this is what we could work on, you know. It would be interesting. So,
and one important thing to keep in mind too is that while all these concepts piece together as part of the SLED model, it's not a matter of one course at one institution has done a better job of implementing it than another, because it's an analytical tool as opposed to a prescriptive tool. And you'll have some courses, some of our researchers, we all come from different countries, so we all have different contexts. So we're answering some of the questions differently. Like, for instance, how readily do your students have access to their own laptop computers or their own mobile devices or tablet devices inside and outside of the classroom? Obviously, that's going to be different in South Africa or in Ethiopia or in Portugal than it is in Canada or in the US. That doesn't mean that those courses are not effectively designing seamless learning experiences. Those are the contexts in which they're working. So it's how you take that data and analyze it and then use it to redesign and redeploy your course in a way that will create the best possible, most seamless learning experience for your students. So it's an analytical tool, not a prescriptive tool.
yeah. Yes. I think from the the fascinating part for me working with this is really making it as simple as one can, because as I said before, it can become so much, and all the information that you are learning in your course now as master students, right? At some stage you wonder, where is it going to end? Because technology evolves and evolves and evolves, and you know, we are now in the information age, in the fourth industrial revolution. I mean, the next step is everything is immersed and we are in a virtual reality, and we're hardly here anymore. We're just like somewhere in the cloud. And how would you do that? You know, it can become quite scary in a way. One doesn't know how to address these things. But now you have with an analytical tool like this, it gives you structure. And it makes it so much more feasible and touchable. You know, you can actually say, okay, I know what you're talking about. It's exactly this. So I was presenting at a conference in Portugal, and one of the keynote speakers just before me was talking about the challenges, you know, the big data and how the students' data can be used. And one needs to be really careful about this, and you have to be careful about that. And He talked about virtual reality, how that will come into the classrooms, and how will we be able to manage all of this. You know, he saw it as big dragons in the future. And it was actually really nice because after that I could explain to them how you can really bring this together and say, you know, virtual reality is just an experience. It's another experience, but it's still the student. So you may bring them into this new world of being able to see things in 3-dimensional, but at the end it's still the student, and we want to focus on him. You know, so that's really fascinating. That with this seamless learning, I mean, at this point, seamless learning is not a new thing. It has evolved, as I said, from the beginning when the technology started. The first people were talking about seamless when they wanted to bring in a classroom and outside the classroom learning, you know, bring those two together. But when the technology came in, it was more. And it's not as if we have now invented something new. It's just the experience that's part of it that makes it more understandable and more usable. But in terms of the universal design, I'm very interested to hear what you had to do, which project you specifically had to do. May they share their projects with me?
Oh, they certainly can, but you're reminding me here, and a lot of people in this class have taken 610 with me, as well as 604, and you'll remember the problem identification in 610, followed by using Tony Bates's sections tool to analyze things. And right from the beginning of 610, if anybody started mentioning, oh, I'd like to bring in this tool or introduce this sort of thing into my course, I'd almost slap them across the back of the hands like, nope, 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 stop. You need to stop there. What's the problem? That's all I want you to tell me. We're going to look at different types of tools later on. And then when you pick a type of tool, we'll look at some current applications. So yeah, it is a granular process, and the current technology, the flavor du jour, doesn't matter if you start from what the problem is and start from the student-centeredness and the experience first. Then when you get to the actual implementation, you could pick using an animated video, or you could pick using a mobile phone, or you could go all the way to picking a VR headset and achieve the same experiential goal. So very nice to see that reflected in Dr. Hambrock's comments there. So you all don't think that I'm just a nutcase by harping on you guys about that the past couple of courses. Anybody want to share any of their experiences with their analyses that you did in your papers and related to some of what Dr. Hambrock has been talking about? We have a few minutes left. I see Ben's got his hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I had a kind of a question actually going into some of what she was talking about earlier. When we look at the slideshow that you presented, and when you're going through Bloom's taxonomy specifically, we were focused a little bit more on the cognitive domain. And I see, again, a lot of application from there working up through that. So I was thinking a little bit more about the affective and the psychomotor domains, again, speaking of Bloom specifically. And I was kind of thinking about how the SLED model is applicable in those areas. And then you're talking about virtual reality, which again is a really good tool for those, for the cognitive domain, and maybe a little bit into the affective, but the psychomotor, I guess there are some areas there. So I was just trying to kind of like wrap my head around these different areas of applications. And I'm not sure if you have much else you'd like to share, more specifically, like say on the affective domain and psychomotor regarding the model.
Okay, hang on. Go back. That what you wanted to see?
We're not seeing your screen right now, Helga.
Oh, oh, interesting. Let me see if I can then. Okay.
There we go.
Yes. Is that what you wanted to look at?
So yeah, looking at this one, and then I think it was in the next slide or the next few slides after that, you got into Bloom's taxonomy.
Okay. Mm-hmm. There it is.
And your screen's not being shared anymore.
Can't you see it?
No, we can't see your screen now.
Oh, no. Then I have to share again. Share. There. Okay, is it?
There we go.
Okay. Right. Yes.
Yeah, so that's what I was referring to. Is here again, we're looking at the cognitive domain specifically, which of course is very important here. But like I said, I was looking at this model, the SLED model, thinking about the other two domains that Bloom mentions. Again, I was just trying to think of the applications in that. And I think it would work well in there. So like as I said, I was just wondering what your thoughts were on those other domains, which aren't shown in here.
Oh yeah, you're actually quite right. You know, what since we've started working with the seamless learning model, I do agree with you. It's as if the ADDIE model and the Bloom's taxonomy need a bit of revision, because I feel that they should have added a bit more about on how these would be implemented. You know, it's one thing to say, okay, you need to remember this word, but how will you do it? You know, the how part of it, the implementation part of it. And I think with we can ask, is it in here? Is there which parts of the process of the cognitive processes of Bloom's taxonomy are included in the learning experience? Which parts of it of Bloom's fits in which part of the concepts? So I mean, core concepts, I think that's Bloom's taxonomy fits in the design concept. It also fits in with the core concepts. I even think that it can have a positive effect on students if they know what they're doing and where they are at, you know, giving them more confidence. Okay, practical concepts, I don't know if Bloom's would fit in there that much, but you will be able to apply what you learned. And then human concepts, that would be the support part, which would maybe making sure that they did understand the work. But do you see what I'm saying? I can see how, you know, Bloom's taxonomy, for instance, it's all the different levels of learning, but they can actually fit into each one of these parts as well.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. And then, like I said, when we look at the other parts of Bloom's taxonomy, such as, again, the affective domain, I can see how the affective domain would fit into like positive concepts and
yes,
yeah, the human concepts, maybe even design concepts.
yeah.
And then the psychomotor, of course, very much in the practical concepts.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, no, that's a really good observation. I like that.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we've got time for maybe one more quick question because we're getting close to the top of the hour, and I don't want to keep you all this late at night, keep you from your families or from your dinners or from just getting a bit of rest if you're also feeling still a little under the weather like some of us have been. So anybody have one last quick question for Dr. Hambrock? Yes, I was asking if we could have a copy of the slides. So Helga, maybe if you wanted to email the slide deck to me, I can share that in the course.
Absolutely. Sure. That will be my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pity I couldn't speak more to you because I spoke too much. I wanted to hear more about what you are doing, but or maybe you can do this at a later stage. What if you do a project, something in between? I don't know how much time you have in your course, but where you would maybe do the analysis that we spoke about. But anyway, we can talk about working together more in the future. I have my students too, so maybe we can meet up with my students and you. Okay, but thank you so much for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for joining us, Helga. It's been a real pleasure listening to your perspectives on this and hearing some of the questions from people of the class and having this exchange. Really appreciate you taking the time to do this out of your busy schedule. A good example of a seamless learning experience because a lot of us are in different parts of Canada right now or other parts of the world. You are in Chicago at the moment. I guess we're kind of glad that we caught you still in Chicago and not in South Africa at the moment because that really would have been a bit of a time warp for you. But it's really appreciated. And I'll double check and make sure I've shared the link to our latest book in the course. I think that I have, but if I haven't, I'll put it up tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And again, for those of you who weren't here right at the beginning, if you haven't received a grade on your assignment 2 yet, that's just because Joanna has offered to give us a few comments on a handful of the papers, not all of them. And as soon as I get those comments from her, I'll fire your feedback back towards you. But you all did great on those assignments. Nobody got a bad mark. Thank you, everyone.